In this photograph you can see what I call the North Meadow. It's the shot taken from the kissing gate on the public footpath that traverses the immediate northern boundary of Heron Lodge. The view is taken looking due west. It's just to the right of D-side, the small white bungalow that was featured in the second photograph. And in the foreground and part way across the photograph you can see the course of the public footpath is actually flooded. It's spring 2001. There was no ground raising underway at all on Heron Lodge at that time, and that flooding or that waterlogging of the footpath, bearing in mind that we did have a flood in the latter part of 2000 but it had gone by then, that waterlogging is a direct result of the Willows Fish Farm development blocking the natural watercourse along the North Meadow, and that blocking of that watercourse goes on identical to this each and every part of the year since the development of the Willow Fish Farm, regardless of the ditch that they were asked to facilitate between Heron Lodge and the edge of the Willows Fish Farm. That waterlogging continues each and every year whenever the water levels are, or whenever the water level rises, or whenever we get rainfall, due to the fact that the development of Willows Fish Farm has completely changed the water table throughout this whole area. This is a very dramatic picture. It shows Heron Lodge completely surrounded by floodwater. This was taken following the highest flood on record, 6th of November 2000. It's taken by me looking due east, having clambered out of a boat onto the bunding, the height of the bunding that surrounds the fish farm at that point, looking across my property. Worthy of note, there was no evidence at all of any inner hedge line or boundary line whatsoever. This is taken from the west side of the property looking east from the bunding of the fish farm. In the immediate foreground of the shot you can see the remaining leaves on the beech trees that just happened to be at that point. I think there were 3 at that point remained on Heron Lodge ground in that foreground, so you can see the extent of the western curtilage to the rear of Heron Lodge. To the left of the building is what remains of the very ugly conservatory that I'd taken or partially dismantled at that time to facilitate the raising of Heron Lodge. The structure that you see there was prepared ready for raising, ready for lifting. I devised a way of lifting it. This flood, or the flooding of Heron Lodge, would not, quite definitely would not have occurred had the enforcement officers for Chester City Council, the local planning authority, made repeated threats to take out injunctions against me throughout the time, July through till the end of September, when I was attempting to lift the property in line with the Environment Agency recommendation and the Environment Agency permissions that I later found in the files of the local planning authority during a meeting with them in the following summer 2001. So had they not have continually threatened to take injunction action against me for raising my property, that flood of Heron Lodge would not have occurred. It would have been in the air well and truly before the flood occurred. This photograph you've already seen. It was part of the Channel 5, Chapter 1, Channel 5 presentation of the public interest aspects of the raising of the property to stop it from flooding. The reason I've repeated the photograph in this slideshow in Chapter 4 is to illustrate two things. First and foremost is the completion, and that's yours truly there, raising his arm in salutation of the fact that that was the very, very last pump of the 8th 20-ton jack that was used to jack up the property systematically. It was the only way I could think out to get it up in the air. There was all kinds of elaborate ways suggested to me, and numerous quotations came in for doing the work that were absolutely astonishing in price, or just totally prohibitive. But that's the raising of the property. That was the last lift, and as you can see, it's 6 block courses underneath the jack supporting the property at that point, but they were then replaced by the concrete block columns. Can you imagine that property sat there on 8 concrete block legs? What it would look like, looking from the west side of the property, looking east towards Denomere Lane. But one other interesting fact here is, as you can see, I've donned Wellington boots, because on the east side of the dwelling and on the west side of the dwelling, a large trench had to be dug out to, first of all, give us a working area for me to be able to get the girders underneath the property to raise it, but also to excavate further down and provide 8 sacrificial concrete foundations for the jacking columns to hold the building as it was going, to support the jacks and follow the jacks up to support the building while the girders were positioned over the eventual support columns. Those trenches filled with water within half a day of being created, and were filled with water throughout the whole of the summer of 2001 while that work was going on. Now, those trenches were first of all taken out by a groundwork contractor in the May/June of 2000 in readiness to lift the property before the flood season of 2000 that I've already remarked on. Those flooded conditions prevailed throughout the summer of 2001 as well. Now they prevail because of the waterlogging of the ground caused by the devastation of the water table by the creation of the Willows fish farm. This photograph is the first of 3, which was taken towards the end of 2001, early 2002, and it shows in the foreground the raised ground, or the ground raising going on. You can see the tracks of the vehicles that were being used at that time. Mid photograph is the top of the sewage treatment plant installation. This is looking due south. Had it have been earlier, of course, you would have been looking at the caravan on the pre-raised ground looking due south, but you can see there the beach hedging at the perimeter of Heron Lodge, and it's looking south across the Willows fish farm, so you can get an indication from this photograph of the height of the ground of Heron Lodge compared to the height of the ground of the Willows fish farm at the southern extremity of Heron Lodge ground. Here we see the ground work, or the ground raising going on, whilst at the same time I'm attempting to do some landscaping. I wanted to get the landscaping in early on to get maturity, but this is looking due west, almost in the same direction as photograph number 2 at the D-side chalet bungalow. In fact, I think you can see it in the extreme distance of the photograph, about centre field, I would think. But again, you can see the relevance of the ground raising on the western boundary of Heron Lodge, abutting the fish farm bunding, it is still below the level of the fish farm bunding. So it does in actual fact comply with section 55 of the Town and Country Planning Act. I think it's paragraph 3b governing the raising of ground. This is the third photograph with regards to the ground raising. This one's taken towards mid 2003. This photograph enables you to understand not just the level of Heron Lodge ground, which is in the foreground. Those small saplings that you see there is the new landscaping that was taking place with regards to beech and plantings to form the perimeter hedgerow at the back of the property. But also importantly, you can see the level of the bunding for the Willows Fish Farm, the raised area. This bunding was installed, as I've said earlier, around the complete perimeter of the 17-acre fish farm. It's about 3.5 feet above the level of the ground. The other reason for the photograph is to draw attention to the pond that's shown there. It's one of over a dozen ponds on the Willows Fish Farm. According to the planning permission, there should be no raising of the ground or creation of ponds directly adjacent to what was originally Heron's Flight. As you can see, this one is some 8 feet or so away from the rear boundary of Heron Lodge. I don't think you'd have to be an hydrology or drainage expert to understand that if you raise 17 acres of ground and create over a dozen ponds with water in it, that's not going to affect any surrounding ground, not only with regards to waterlogging, but also with regards to effects on existing water tables. This is taken from the eastern boundary of Heron Lodge, looking due west along its southernmost hedge line. It shows mid-picture the sewage treatment plant installation. Sewage treatment plant installation, although not needing planning permission, was the subject of a planning application that Chester City Council, local planning authority, gave permission for its installation. You can see that the sewage treatment plant is above a metre in height. There's approximately I would say half a metre into the old ground. Taking that photograph, I was actually standing on the old ground level. Now, that type of installation can work within ground, but it won't work in ground that is constantly waterlogged. So that was the reason why I chose to put a proper sewage treatment plant in. I wanted to make sure that I got adequate sewage treatment, and B, that I didn't resort to a cesspit or a septic tank system, because in a floodplain, if you put a cesspit or a septic tank system into the ground, every time you get a flood, those chambers will discharge raw sewage into the environment. This unit was installed at the height per the planning application, per the planning permission, and had to have inlet pipes and outlet pipes within raised ground to comply with building regulations and the manufacturer's installations. So that is the initial picture of the installation of the sewage treatment plant, and as you can see to the right of the photograph is the raised ground of Heron Lodge.